We all live with a sense of purpose. The question is it by conscious design or is it by unconscious adoption? I think what we're seeing and what we're living through is people are experiencing what I call a perpetual life crisis. This sense that there must be more to life than this is just growing and growing. And unfortunately, even though we're very wise as a society in many ways, I don't think we know how to deal with it. I don't think we know how because we've never been equipped with the questions to ask to help us. Living well is not about achieving more and getting more possessions, becoming richer or powerful, or the classic definitions of success. Living well is all about learning to be truly comfortable in your own skin, being driven by a deeper sense of purpose, and then trying to live that in an authentic way every single day.
It's one of the things I talk about in my book. It's just the tribal nature of human beings and how we're in this constant paradoxical tension of wanting to fit in and be part of something that's bigger than ourselves, and at the same time stand out by being a unique individual. And actually, we've constantly got that tension. And I think that sports teams are the ultimate manifestation of it. It gives us a clear sense of identity. It gives us a clear sense of meaning, directs our day-to-day behavior. And it never ceases to amaze me just when you're hooked on it, just how deep that hook is. I remember once I was traveling on the train down to Gatwick and going to work, and there was this bloke there and his son was only about 4 or 5. And I could hear them talking as we were traveling. And they were talking about struggles they had with money. So the dad saying, well, we can't really do this, we can't really do that. And well, the house we're not sure about, and because they clearly lived in a sort of social housing. And yet they were spending a bunch of money to go to Barcelona to go and see Chelsea play. And so you were giving up so much to go and watch people who earn more in a week than you would earn in 5 years, kick a ball around, and both of them in their club kicks, deeply passionate, and it kind of it transcends existence or your day-to-day existence. And I think that's it. And I don't think I've ever got that. I don't think I've ever felt that passionate about sports in that way.
And I think both are fine. It's like almost like a blue team, green team, and like a business leadership, like the exploiters and the explorers. I think you and I might fall into the explorers camp, and I think that is, interesting because you might adopt a different viewpoint. You might be able to translate different aims or like align incentives or something like that, and then but we're not Einstein inventing E equals MC squared or just pouring over I'm sorry, I'm speaking for you here, but like for me,
That's right.
I started to identify where on that tension, I may be like 60-40, 70-30 or something. And I think as far as team building, this is a little bit of a tangent perhaps, but actually maybe germane. So I was speaking to a mentee recently, and kind of sharing a little bit of what I've started to realize, and in the tension between trying to challenge yourself and get better at what you're bad at, and growing through that, and also recognizing what you're good at and investing in that so that you provide more value to a community or a team. And there's, I think, it's for each of us to decide, I guess, what that ratio is. But I think previously I thought that I should be a complete human. And so I should be equally, decent in all dimensions, accounting, math, science, whatever, law. And when I went to business school, you're in a mixed cohort with people who have different strengths. Typically, they're mid-career. They've been doing accounting for 20 years, or they've been an engineer, and now they're pivoting into a different industry. So the depth of experience is beyond what I could learn in a weekend, or I could read a book and feel like I'm their equal. And I recognize it's almost like, again, to go back to a sports analogy, where you feel you're pretty good, let's say playing basketball with your neighbor, and then you play with a a professional athlete. You realize there's
Mm.
like levels. So anyway, when you need to provide for a family or you need to belong to a tribe, I think that it's important to figure out what you're going to contribute and how, like, what is your moat? And that, in my understanding now, that's rarely by, like, let's say you and me here. Let's say that I discovered that you're better at something than me. My previous kind of mindset was, oh, I've got to like really hit the books and really try to catch up to Rob on this.
Yeah.
Whereas now I'd be a little bit like, oh, okay, let's try to provide a value to Rob that he doesn't have, so that I can
Mm.
then benefit from his strength in this way, and then we become kind of like a super molecule. Um,
Yeah.
and then like so that I was just kind of recognizing a different mindset there. And I think that that's similar to like the explorer exploiter kind of frame. So anyway, that's all to say, like,
Nice.
you know, you do you. If you're, because like it really kind of like confused me, like why, like my parents too, like they're super into like baseball teams, and I was like, what's the purpose? But I guess it's just, you know, that aligns to them, and you know, we each kind of come together in different ways.
Yeah. And the point being, every human needs to have a sense of purpose. And some will find
Yeah,
it in baseball, some will find it in their football tribe, some will find it in a broader contribution, but we all need one. And again, I'm sort of overselling my book here, but I think we all live with this sense of purpose. The question is it by conscious design or is it by unconscious adoption?
I like that. Um, Can you kind of unpack each of those? Like what would be the unconscious design?
Yeah,
Do you have
yeah,
like an
absolutely.
example?
Yeah, so so imagine that through life we are born into the world and we try to make our sense as a individual human being. And through life, we get all sorts of influences over us. And those influences will guide us often unconsciously as to what our worldview is, what we believe is right and wrong, what's important, what's not important.
Hmm.
And then through that, often what happens is that we adopt whatever meaning is created through that worldview. So a simple example is um, all of my family tree had been in the military. My parents were ex-British Army. They'd met in the army. My father had an accident. My mother was a nurse, kind of, and so the story goes. And so I automatically grew up assuming everybody joined the military. Didn't even think anything of it. And even when I didn't get in the army the first time, because I had a knee operation, I still went on and pursued civilian university and then found my way into the Air Force because I just didn't have a frame that there was anything else outside. And a simple story that brings it to life. I remember sitting in business school, and they were talking about the Big Five at the time. And I nudged the guy next to me. I said, "What the hell is the Big Five?" And he said, "The Big Five accounting firms." And I stopped and I looked at him and I said, "What's an accounting firm? And why is there five of them?"
Yeah.
Just because it is like, phew, that's a worldview. And so the unconscious adoption is that we just fall into whatever we perceive. I think
Mm,
the conscious design is, do we go out beyond that? Do we start to look at what really drives us, what really excites us, what brings us a sense of energy and vitality for life? And conscious
mm,
design is in pursuing more of that. Like you said, you start to realize as you grow up that actually of the million things that I could possibly do, I'm unlikely to be even average good at all of them. There'll be a few that I'm very good at and a few that I'm brilliant at. Why don't I just focus on those few things and get really good at that and make sure that that's giving me that sense of energy, vitality, and more importantly, purpose. And I think that's the
mhm.
difference between the two. I think the vast majority of people, so I'm laboring the point now, but the vast majority of people have unconscious adoption that are yearning for something different. They just don't know how to get to something different.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I had a similar kind of perspective change in business school too, learning what the new kind of uh, metrics are for rating like accomplishment in terms of like consulting firms and stuff like this. One thing that I thought was interesting, and you might relate as a fellow transplant, is the software of the brain, and this kind of like um, there's this concept of like Markov blankets in computational linguistics, and some now perhaps in AI, but it's so I kind of like a fly in a bottle that's in another bottle that's in another bottle. So as you um I'm trying to put this like without bias. I was going to say progress, but I'm trying to be open minded here, and because I was going to ask you another question, like, does everyone have to kind of go that direction? But let's say that when you are born in a place, you would pick up a certain language, a certain accent for that language. Like you and I both understand each other perfectly fine, but we've got tells that we were born in different places that we recognize probably within a few like syllables. And then there's the knowledge of perhaps like a metaphysics, like a religion or something like that. We're talking about like, patriotic drivers or like sports kind of passion, like a certain tribe within a tribe. Um, and then maybe you go to uni in like, New Zealand or London or something like that. And all of a sudden you're like outside of that bottle. And
Yeah,
some of this stuff carries with you, some of it does not, I guess, depending on kind of how different your move was. And then you might start to wonder what was real about your root operating system. How arbitrary was it? Like if you were born in Beijing or in New York, would you have still been like, I don't know the Melbourne teams off the top of my head, but like,
yeah,
that local
yeah,
sports fan or,
yeah.
so it starts like you start to perhaps question what is software, what is hardware, what is yours, how much of it, like you said, was unconscious design and like fate. Like were you supposed to be born in Melbourne like a million years
Mm.
ago? Was that like ordained that like that was going to happen? Like so just these kinds of questions, like who are you, where are you going, and then what do you want to do about it, I guess. And I feel like in the arrow of time, those become less fixed and more fixed at the exact same time. It's like this quantum superposition.
It's so the book that I've written, because it is exactly this. It's called Ask Three Questions: How to Live Well in a Distracted World. And the three questions are: who am I? Which is all about what's the identity I want to adopt? How do I want to show up in the world? And how does that influence which tribes that I'm a part of? Why am I here? Which is all about what's the sense of purpose I have in and for my life, which is what's important for me. What's driving my existence, and then, pardon me, how will I live? Which is all about, well, how am I going to live as both of those things, as who I am, and why I'm here. Which is all about how do I direct my energy with far more mindful intention. And the reason I got to that place is because I think what sits underneath the human condition is a set of what I call human dilemmas, existential drivers, which are not unique to the human species, but their combination is. And I think you're exactly right, because when you start to look at that, well, some of it is hardwired into us. We have a genetic makeup, which means that we're predisposed to certain things in our existence. And if you do look at some of the research where they talk about sort of trauma passed through the genes and things like that, there's certain stuff that is hardwired into us. I think that, like, if you take the computer analogy, then but there is a lot of design work that we can do in terms of the software, the operating system that we adopt. I think what few people do, though, is few people think about it in that way, to say, actually, there's some conscious decisions I can make, because back to the sense of meaning that we talked about earlier, we all have an identity, we all have a purpose, and we all live every day. The question is, are we designing those things consciously, or are we just unconsciously drifting through life in doing whatever we feel like is necessary to survive or to achieve whatever we think is important? And my philosophy on life, and this is sort of based on 25 years of coaching people, is that the vast majority of people I meet have this sort of a quiet unease that sits beneath the surface of going, well, is this it? Is this all there is? Isn't there more to life than this? And there's huge power in that sense, because that's what they call existential guilt. Because if you're asking that question, the simple answer is yes, of course there is. But how do you go about finding it? And I think the way you find it is through those three questions, through exactly to your point, the identity, purpose, and practice for living.
I love that. Do you think you mentioned 25 years? So this is .com. This is social media. There's a lot of cultural, societal, civilizational paradigm shifts in that quarter of a century. And this, when you mentioned the lack of purpose, I wanted to ask you if you felt that we were. It's hard to intelligently talk about like the world as one thing, but do you feel like more and more we as a society, let's say broadly speaking, are moving away from a I guess a strong or a fixed or a easily identifiable sense of purpose?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think it's interesting that I said to somebody the other day, I think in an age of accelerating technology, especially AI, and I think the artificial intelligence is, I think it's really important to shine the light on that. I think we are yearning more for an understanding and an embracing of our humanity, but we're even less well equipped to satisfy it or to answer it. And the reason I say that is that I think that so I'm approaching 50. I'll be 50 this year. So I have lived through lots of those stages and lived in lots of different countries and seen and worked with lots of different cultures. And I think what has, and this is well researched and well documented, is that over time you've just seen a breakdown of certain institutions, breakdown of a belief in organized religions. So once upon a time we all went to church, we all had those beliefs, so that's broken down. And then I think you've seen a breakdown in belief around other institutions like the police. Once upon a time you're heavily respectful of the police, and now that's less so. And then you just sort of track that through to governments, to other things. And I think what we've ended up with is a society that has become so heavily fragmented because everything is now driven by individualized sense of identity. And if you've read books like Identity, which is all about identity politics by Francis Fukuyama, is a great book that sort of describes it. Is that we've just become more and more fragmented, but more and more but we're less able to sort of reconnect back to our humanity. And I think that what's happening to us is that where once upon a time these feelings that there must be more to life would bubble up through a midlife crisis. And then that became earlier for the next generations. It went from being a midlife crisis where you sort of hit late 40s and you went out and bought a Porsche and did something stupid, to then a quarter life crisis where people coming out of university, hitting the world of work are going, is this all it is? Hang on, I thought there'd be more. To now, I think we're in an era where I think what we're seeing and what we're living through is people are experiencing what I call a perpetual life crisis. Is that this crisis is just less significant in terms of the peak of experience. So it's subtle, but it's perpetual. It's always there. And I think what we're experiencing with the amplification of uncertainty through geopolitics, technology, climate change, is that this sense that there must be more to life than this is just growing and growing. And and unfortunately, even though we're very wise as a society in many ways, I don't think we know how to deal with it. I don't think we know how, because we've never been equipped with the questions to ask to help us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting, and I feel that to be true as you shared it. There's something you said earlier about how we each want to belong and we each want to stand out at kind of the same time, and I wonder if those tensions or those desires, those innate desires, are amplified and less easy to hold on to at the same time in the individual digital era. Because if I am free, if everything is up to me, then I'm simultaneously responsible for what happens and like what I do. And I don't know if we're equipped to carry the world on our shoulders individually. And I think that there's this desire like, oh, you know what, I want to move to Melbourne. Sure, no problem, you can do that, get a plane ticket,
Yeah.
And like
Yeah.
before that was almost impossible. Like that was like you get to make that decision once, and now you can, so it's like, oh wait, was I supposed to move to Melbourne or Sydney? Was I supposed to like,
Yeah.
was I supposed to study this or go to that university? Was I supposed to like date that person or this person? And it just, I think there's a cost to everything. I think that's necessary to kind of ground decisions. And there's so much to talk about here, but I'll save that for later if it comes up. But so I feel that we're it's almost like we've lost our footing, like with the way that we were used to connecting with a tribe and a place. And like maybe a few generations back, if your family was a farming family and my family was like, blacksmith family or something like that, you and I were not burdened by choice. Like,
Yeah.
guess what you're going to be?
That's right.
Guess what I'm going to be? Like,
Yeah.
and if I really envied the farmers, like tough luck, like,
Yeah.
your family. And so there's this, for better or worse, you just more or less stayed in your lane. We're aware of, this feudal kind of caste system and the unfairness of that, like the Cinderella story, someone who dreams to be something bigger, and there's a beauty in that, and that resonates with me, and I like that, and I wouldn't want to tell anyone they can't be something if they really want to be. However, there's always a cost. There's always a trade-off, and I think that one of the costs of optionality is this kind of loss of a fixed identity. And then I guess the questions that you ask is, does that matter to you? Because there's always going to be a cost. So let's say that it pains me to lose a sense of identity, but my desire for growth and exploration and adventure is greater. And I do some internal calculus that in my 40s, that's a 40-60 split. That I'm like, I'm willing to pay 40% of that pain in order to get 60% of that pleasure. Maybe that'll change in my 50s. And I'm kind of working this out off the cuff with you. But like, that's how I kind of see the sense making going as far as I see like the world right now. And to the extent that I can project my understanding of the world onto others. And I would guess that that's more or less what we're doing, each of us. Like each news story we watch, each like sitcom that we watch, each, let's say, newspaper that we read, each book, whatever, each conversation at the pub, we're kind of navigating that together. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I'm loving this conversation, by the way. It's such a privilege to be able to talk to somebody who really thinks about these things more deeply. So I think that what we don't appreciate is that at the core of the human condition, I referenced these earlier, but is a set of what I call human dilemmas, existential dilemmas of being human. And I think that there's 5 of them. Number 1 is mortality. Number 2 is identity. Number 3 is meaning. Number 4 is freedom. And number 5 is isolation. And as I said, these are not unique to the human species, but the combination of them is. And within each of those dilemmas, to your point, is a paradoxical tension. And because it's a paradox, you can try to collapse it, but all you do is just swing the pendulum from one side to the other. And I'll bring that to life in terms of a few of them. But actually, if you recognize that tension and you hold it as such, you start to realize that there's a gift within it. And that gift helps you then navigate the 60-40, the 50-50, the 70-30, but it helps you navigate it consciously. It takes you from a place of unconscious adoption to conscious design. And as a simple example,
if you dig straight into the depth of it, mortality is the strongest driver of our human behavior, where the paradox is we only enjoy life because we know it will end. Because actually, if you were to live forever, well, what would be the point? But the gift of that is recognizing that time is finite. And so what am I going to do with it? Well, actually, I only live once. This isn't a dress rehearsal. And there's a lovely quote that says, there are two lives, and the second one starts when you realize you only have one. No, I think it's a Confucius, but and identity I've referenced, which is we want to fit in and stand out. And the gift is, well, we can consciously choose our identity. Meaning is that we yearn for meaning, yet we're the authors of our meaning, which means that I can pick up the pen and be the author of my life. Freedom is that we, to your point around how do we grapple this? We yearn for freedom, yet we're confronted by the choices that come at us. And so, okay, so once upon a time, I didn't have those choices. I could be a blacksmith because that's what my parents were. Now I could be anything. Okay, so what do I choose? And the confronting part of that is, well, every choice that I make negates the other options. And there's a lovely quote by Viktor Frankl on this, where he talks about every decision we make contributes to the monument of our existence. So hang on, every decision I make is actually building up a part of who I am, why I'm here, etc. And I think what's happening in the world today is that once upon a time, is that we didn't have that many choices. We didn't have that many options. And so we weren't really needing to worry too much about the human dilemmas until we hit midlife and realized we had enough financial capacity to do something different. And hence why we bought a Porsche and grew a ponytail. Whereas these days, actually, we have a lot more capacity and we've got the choice. And I think what's happening to us is that the amplification of the human dilemmas and the paradox is causing such discomfort, but we just don't know what to do about it. And hence why what you see in society is a greater swinging of the pendulum, whether you take it to politics, how we're becoming far more polarized, take it to social media where people are being far more forthright in their opinions, that I think people are just searching for something to hang on to give them certainty in this sort of crazy time that we're living in.
Fascinating. There's so much in there that I want to dive into. Let me choose my entry here. So you brought up the term freedom, and I want to touch on that for a moment because that was very integral for much of my life. That topic of freedom, the concept. I was born in the States, and that was part of the brand identity. Was like, we are a free people. Freedom is of the utmost importance. We want to protect freedom, this concept of freedom with your life. And to be honest, a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old just says yes. Like I didn't grasp exactly what freedom meant, but I took it wholesale as it was delivered, and just, this is important. Like, it's like your grandparent handing you like some heirloom saying like, protect this at all costs. Like, okay, grandma. And then as I traveled a bit and lived in some different places that had a different concept of organization and purpose and stuff, I started to feel and see and think that they were free in ways that I was not. And then my concept of freedom started to stretch a little bit and started to permutate. The color of the font changed and stuff like this. And now I wonder if all this optionality, we're actually less free than the blacksmiths and the farmers of the feudal system. What do you think about that?
And that's interesting.
I can expand on that if that was too much to just ask you to fill in.
Yeah, because my natural coaching questions lead to mine. So yeah, say more about that, because I in one level I agree with you and I can see where you're coming from, but another level
I don't mean to suggest that one is better. And I would like to continue to explore what I think we feel is optionality and freedom. I think there's more that we can optimize within our current direction. But what I mean to explore cognitively, at the very least, is that there are two perspectives. And so when you think that something is only additive, such as adding more options, I could be a farmer and a blacksmith and et cetera, et cetera. I now lose some freedom where I have so much, there's more weight to my decisions. There's more regret in, did I make the wrong one? There's more time spent trying to study about everything to a certain extent so that I can make an informed decision. And so I lose a lot of the freedom that I had when my job was done as a blacksmith. I just hung around with the family, had some memories, had some conversations with my friends, and I wasn't spending 23 of my 24 hours a day trying to figure out like what's the next technology I have to learn, or which should I live here because some listicle said that this is a better place to live than the place I was born. And there's like, I just feel like we're burdened by choice now, whereas before we didn't have that. And
yeah, I think that I think it's a great perspective, and I guess if I was to sum it up, what you're saying is that once upon a time we were, let me use provocative language here. Once upon a time, we were imprisoned by the limitation of our existence or our worldview, that I could only be a blacksmith. So in one way, you were constrained by that, which gave you freedom within that.
yes,
And what you're saying now is that the society is so open, there's so much choice that we're now imprisoned by optionality, by all the things that we could do. And I guess the way I'd respond to that is that I think that makes sense, but I'd probably seek to transcend it. Let's take it up a level. And I think the question is, what do we think is the purpose of human existence, of a human life? Not of existence as in why as a species we're here, because fundamentally I believe that existence is inherently meaningless. We're just here. There's no divine need for it, divine rule. We were born, we live, we die. That kind of stuff. And it'd be unsurprising to hear that the underpinning philosophy that I sort of draw a lot of concepts from is existential philosophy. And I think that the dilemma in holding that belief about the inherent meaninglessness of existence is that then you can fall into nihilism, etc. But if I come to your point, is that if we go, okay, so if we are just here, and each of us, you, me, anybody listening to this podcast, each of us are a human. Well, we're only here for a finite period of time, and the universe kind of doesn't care what happens to us. The people around us hopefully do. Hopefully our loved ones care, and we care about them. And so the question becomes, what is the purpose of your existence, and what do you want to make of it? Because if you're clear on that, then there is no imprisonment to it. There is purely choices and being conscious of those choices. And I think the three choices, coming back to my three questions, are you really clear about who you are as the best version of yourself? And the way, I appreciate this probably be both video and audio, but the way I think about it is, if there's an edge to what we're truly capable of, right? So I am not capable of being an NBA basketball player. I'm 6 foot, reasonably coordinated, but rubbish at basketball. So I'll never get there. Right. So that's not, but I'm really capable of other things. So there is an edge to my potential.
mm-hmm.
And I think what happens is a lot of people don't work at the edge of their potential. They work back from it. And they work in their comfort zone for whatever reasons,
mm-hmm.
Safety, security, insecurity, imposter syndrome, whatever. But there have been moments for every human I've worked with that they've worked at the edge. And I think the secret for all of us as humans is that what we should be doing is not be plagued by choice or feel like we're imprisoned by it, but start to ask the questions that help us get to a deeper version of who we are. So who am I as the best version of myself? Well, I know that person because I've felt it. I've been there. So what were the conditions around that, and how do I be more of that? What's the things that give me purpose? What helps me feel energized, fulfilled, like I'm making a difference in the world? Well, I know those things. So why don't I just do more of that? And I think that the reason I share all of this, because I think if we can help people get to those deeper questions and that different level of thinking, then you don't need to worry about choice, because you'll find your answers through those questions. And one of the things I often see with people that I work with is that I describe it as they're trying to find an answer without having a question. So,
yes.
What do I do for a job next? What do I do next? How do I find purpose? Well, you're trying to you haven't even really framed the question properly in terms of what's really driving you, what's core to you. And I think that is the thing that helps us transcend some of the potential imprisonment that we might feel by choice or lack of choice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. It's like you've designed a compass or some way to navigate this time. I don't want to take us on a tangent, but there's a thought that I am working on that connects to what you shared there with the existentialism. I'm not saying I have the evidence that this is my fixed belief, but I like the notion that you and I and everyone around us are stewards of consciousness, and that like consciousness might be some kind of substrate, like a soil, and you and I are like plants coming out of it. And our purpose, if you will, is to grow that consciousness, incubate that consciousness. And so that would map from my perspective to what you shared, in that you're asking these questions, you're living your life. And I also want to add, in case anyone takes it this way, I don't think the feeling of a limitation, or the pain that comes from recognizing limitation, or just wondering if you should be doing more or should be doing different, I don't think that that is a fixed edict for all of time. I think that is information, that is data that you then, as a more mature, more capable individual, can wrestle with, can make a decision, can test, almost like a startup, like your life each day is a startup. Like, am I going to try this? Am I going to try smiling more, smiling less, whatever?
Yeah.
And you can iterate. You can always choose, I think. But what I wanted to convey was just this, I guess you could say, epiphany, that there's two ways, probably more than two ways, but there's, let's say, two ways of looking at any kind of term, any kind of concept, any kind of decision, really. I thought when I got into this big four, big five accounting firm, like it was for these reasons. Now it's maybe for these reasons. Maybe that means you can stay. Maybe that just means you go about it differently. So anyway, I like your map, or your compass, if you will, in terms of having these tools that you can better navigate. I wanted to ask you about the concept of authentic leadership, as I understand that's kind of like your frame or a perspective that you have, and the terms sound good. Leader going back to the wanting to fit in, wanting to stand out, and authentic being like real, credible, etc. I have two questions, and feel free to just take one of them at a time. But what is authentic leadership, for one? And two, do we all need to be, or are we all already leaders?
Yeah. So let me ask the second, answer the second first, and then I'll come back to authentic leadership. So I think that there is a distinction between being a leader and showing leadership. And being a leader is a role that we perform, and often it's attributed to leading people or having a significant role in society, etc. And actually, I think that's a useful frame, but there's lots of connotations that go with being a leader. I much prefer to focus on this concept of showing leadership, because I think all of us can show leadership. And showing leadership to me, for me, is all about what is the difference that we are trying to make in the world through whatever role that we might be performing. And so I think about myself. I am a husband, a father, a son, a brother, a coach, a leadership advisor. And in each of those roles, I'm very clear about the difference I'm trying to make in the world. So, and that, to me, guides me in terms of showing leadership. So I think we can all do that. And that's hugely powerful. And it means we can let go of some of the preconceptions about what it means to be a leader, which is full of all sorts of thoughts and ideas. To the second point about authenticity is that I find myself really frustrated by some of the classic theory about authenticity, because I think it's become one of those kind of nonsense terms that gets thrown about by leadership theorists or different people in my sort of field. And my belief about authenticity is it's not a destination, but it's a practice. Mm-hmm. And authenticity is something that there's a lovely author that Emmy Van Dersen, her name is. She talks about authenticity needs to be hard earned on a daily basis. And for me, authenticity is about inward and outward congruency. And so inward congruency is that where I'm being honest with myself about who I believe I am, how I feel about myself. And I'm completely confident and comfortable in my own skin, even recognizing that I'm flawed in particular ways. And what I mean by that is that, I've not met a perfect human being. I've met a few who think they are, but I've not met a perfect one. And actually, there's something wonderful about just accepting the fact that none of us are perfect, but owning the flaws and owning the magnificence of who we are. And that's inward congruency. So I know my weaknesses, I know my strengths, I know my secrets, and I'm honest with myself about all of it. So that's inward congruency. Outward congruency is where we show up as that person. And I'm not saying that we show up and tell the world everything about ourselves and all of our secrets, but how we feel about ourselves is how people experience us. And what's interesting of that is that even if you lack confidence in yourself, even if you feel like you're an imposter, some of that, as you start to balance those two things out and show up more as the best version of yourself, a lot of that feeling will disappear because actually you're at one with who you are. And that's about being confident and comfortable in your own skin. But the point around it being a practice is that we won't get it right. There's days where I, fall into an inauthentic state or bad faith, as they call it, where I'm deluding myself about certain things, and then I wake up and go, come on, Rob, get over yourself, or I have to pick myself up because I'm not feeling great that day, But that's a natural human thing. It's, are you honest with yourself in that moment?
Mm-hmm.
And I think when we recognize that, I think we let go of the pressure of needing to become authentic, which is trying to then replicate other people that we think are authentic, to actually just being comfortable in our own skin. Yeah.
And that solves that previous tension you mentioned about wanting to fit in and stand out at the same time.
Absolutely.
Your big nose or big ears or whatever become a feature rather than a bug if you're authentic, I think, because there's only one of you, and it's people have this great broader capacity than I think we give ourselves and them credit for accepting and admiring. But I think it's important to identify the moving target, perhaps, of that authenticity. And a adage or parable that came up as you shared that it's better to have loved and lost than to have never loved at all. It's like if you have one authentic day a year, it's better to have had that than to have not.
Absolutely.
So it's worth the endeavor. Can you talk about the topic of embracing the shadow self? That's something I've found in my life and my kind of understanding of people around me as a challenge these days. And can you talk about what it is and why it's important?
Absolutely. So I think that, I love the concept of the shadow, and I think it's hugely powerful. And there's some great concepts, theory around it, or quotes around it that say, the brighter the light, the darker the shadow, or it's not that the shadow exists or whether or not the shadow exists, it's what do you do about it? And so every human other than robots, which are clearly not humans or psychopaths, have their shadow. Everybody I talk to, once you uncover it, you learn that it's there. And the shadow is all of that repressed content that sits beneath the surface. Sometimes we're conscious of it, sometimes we're not. And the interesting thing is when we're not conscious of it, it will influence anyway. It will leak into the world. And when I work with people, often what you see is, especially when they're under stress, you'll see the shadow self starting to leak into the world and become dysfunctional because they're trying to contain it so much. But brighter the light, the darker the shadow. They're under so much pressure that it becomes so dark and it starts to come into the world. And you can see this through people burning out, through people sort of adopting really strange behaviors, whatever it might be. And for me, I think there's three things that we can do when we want to work with the shadow. I think number one is just understand that it's there. Just face into it. So what sits in my shadow that I'm perhaps not being fully honest with myself about? What sits there beneath the surface that I think is influencing me? Where does it come from? Then the second question is then how is that influencing me on a day-to-day basis? Because if I understand that, then I can understand what impact it's having. And then the third is how do I start to embrace that shadow as a part of who I am? There's something about the magnificence of the shadow self in terms of who we are and how we become. And so as an example of this, I worked with somebody who had suffered from deep anxiety. So she would have anxiety attacks. And for years, she said she hid it away. And so it would build up and build up, and then it would just pop in a monumental way. And she said it just held me back. And, for much of her life, that she'd be magnificent. Everybody thought she was brilliant until she wasn't. And then, clearly that had consequences. And she said that once she stopped and looked at it and said, so what is this? What is it? Where does it come from? And there's a lot to do with her childhood. She said, so what is it doing for me? Well, it's causing me levels of dysfunction, but actually when I get to the core of it, the power of it is it gives me a sensitivity into myself and into others that many other people don't know. And when she recognized it, actually, it helped her read people differently. It helped her support people differently. And unfortunately, that would also create anxiety because then she'd over-index on that. And when she recognized that, she learned to slow that down and actually use it as a superpower rather than something that got in her way. What was really interesting is that when she used the shadow self, it became more integrated, and the shadow became less light, less dark, and become more of a integrated version of who she was. And that's where I think the shadow self is hugely powerful.
Thanks for sharing that. That's interesting, and I agree. It's the image of an iceberg kind of comes up where there's like more beneath the surface than meets the eye. So your book is titled "Ask Three Questions," and it's been 20 years or so. You said 25 years in coaching. Which of your own three questions do you find more challenging, and why?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think that throughout my life, each of them has been more prominent and more difficult than others. So the three questions: who am I? Why am I here? How will I live? On the surface seem really simple, but as soon as you start asking them, they take you into a deep place because they're connected to the human dilemmas. I think that now that I'm approaching 50, I'm really confident and feel really good about who am I and why am I here. And I mean, that's just, it sounds really odd. I was talking to a CEO the other day about it, and she said, I've been grappling with your three questions, Rob. And she said, the only answer I've got for who am I is, I won't say a name, but I'm this. And she said her first name. And she said it in such a way that you could see she was super confident. Like you could see her, oh, actually, I like this. I like who I am. And I think that I've managed to, through my own experience and journey, got to that stage. And the same with why am I here? And mine's all about helping people to live well, and whilst doing that for myself. And so I'm really clear on that. I think the third question is that the piece around back to authenticity is trying to live that every single day, and we didn't talk about families, but, I'm a husband. I've got two sort of teenage children. I love what I do. I've got a busy day job. So you've got that everyday pressure, aging parents, all that wonderful stuff that is creates pressure on us. And I think the ability to live who I am and why I'm here is something that I have to really consciously practice every single day. And I think I've developed enough habits to really make that natural, but it's not without tension, And I think that there's something wonderful in that back to being magnificent and flawed as human beings. One of the things I love most about the journey is it's not perfect. There's highs, there's lows, there's ups and downs. And I think that third question, once you've answered the first two, becomes where the real richness of human existence is. And I think that's the one that I'm constantly challenged by, but actually challenged in a way that I love the journey more.
That's beautiful. This might be an invitation to a future conversation, but one thought that came to mind as you were sharing that was the weight that our given names have. If I were to accidentally call you by a different name or misspell your name, there is this like phase shift, like this kind of distortion that's uncomfortable when in a sense it's kind of arbitrary. It's a sound, it's a chosen handle. And you might choose to change the handle. Perhaps you have a nickname. There's some entertainers adopt a stage name or a pen name for an author. Do you explore that all in your coaching? The concept of choosing like a cornerstone, such as a name, in order to invite a different perspective or choice set?
No, I don't. I guess the reason that I don't is because I think each of us need to anchor to what gives us a sense of identity. And that could be a name, it could be a football club, it could be any number of things, but is it authentic? Is it inwardly and outwardly congruent? And so for me, when I say, I'm Rob Cross, and one of my greatest achievements, I think, is just enjoying the fact of being myself, which sounds odd, but that person that looks in the mirror, looks back at you when you stare them in the eyes, you go, actually, I really like being me. I enjoy it. It's fun. So it's flawed and all these things. And I couldn't care less what people call me. Couldn't care less. It's indifferent because I know who I am and I know what I am and I know why I'm here and all of that 3 question stuff. But I think if a name is important for you, then be clear on that and be clear on why it's important to you and what that's giving you in whatever way. I've met some people who will introduce themselves saying, I'm a Christian. That'll be the first thing they say, or I'm a Catholic, or Jewish, or whatever religion might be. And that's how they identify themselves, and that's their anchor. And so whether it's a name or something else, I think it's being clear on what it is for you.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Well, is there anything, Rob, that we did not touch on regarding the 3 questions in your book or this compass that you've, I'm using that term, this tool for navigating the time that we have here, that you want to leave us with?
Yeah, I think there is. So I think one of the greatest lessons I've learned in life, and this is referenced in the book, is that living well is not about achieving more and getting more possessions, becoming richer or powerful, or the classic definitions of success. Living well is all about learning to be truly comfortable in your own skin, being driven by a deeper sense of purpose, and then trying to live that in an authentic way every single day. Some days you'll get it right, some days you won't, but you're always trying. And I guess with that lesson, I think that every human can learn to live well in the context that they live today or their existence today. But only that human that looks at you back in the mirror can make that choice for you. And for me, every human can live well, but only you can make that choice for yourself. I think that's the most powerful lesson I've ever learned, and the lesson I share with anybody who's listening or I talk to. So.
Well, thank you for sharing that with us. We have the book, Ask 3 Questions. I imagine people can buy that where books are sold. Where can people follow you or connect with you?
Yeah, so if you go to robcross.com, that's where you'll find me. You'll find more about what I do and find more about the book.
Okay. Well, thank you for talking to us today. It was a really interesting conversation.
Yeah, great to meet you, David. I really enjoyed that. Really enjoyed it.